Thank you, Paul. That was wonderful.
Sure.
Has anyone got any burning questions for Paul?
Being asked.
We don't have a roaming mic, so you'll have to predict. But any questions for Paul before we finish up?
Was he part of those communist uprisings in Berlin, or was he a bystander?
Journalist.
A journalist.
So he got caught in there. It's a really interesting story because it all involves Hitler. Hitler was banned from speaking in Berlin as a foreigner because he was Austrian, and they lifted the ban on him speaking, and there was a Nazi rally and some people were killed, so they reimposed the ban, and they kept it in for May Day, which was a really provocative thing for the socialist police to do to the communist organisations. So the communists had their rallies regardless, and then this kind of fighting broke out. And if you've seen Babylon Berlin, it's exactly what actually happened. They were given more serious kind of arms because Germany wasn't allowed to have an army, so it had this very militaristic police force and like 12,000 police were mobilised. It was really full on, and I think the police hated the communists and they were provoking them. And Mackay was asked to work as a stringer by a guy called Sefton Delmer, who was an Australian who grew up in Berlin. And because that fighting was happening in two places, he needed someone to go and check what was going on. And that's why he and the police were both going around Berlin interviewing people about what Mackay was doing, because the police actually lied. That's why I do wonder if they did hide the bullet. Because they said, oh, we saw Mr. Mackay in the afternoon and we told him not to go here because it's dangerous. And Sefton Delmer said, no, he didn't. He was teaching English to children of a film producer. And sure enough, there's an interview with the mother of the children. And that's why there's those little statements from the housemaid. It was great for me. There's this detailed portrait of what he's doing leading up to that incident. But no, not at all involved. And apparently, according to Sefton Delmer, it was the first time he'd been to Neukölln. So he would have really been at a disadvantage because it wasn't his neighbourhood. And it was dark. They'd shot out all the lights, so it was pitch dark. In this quite small area of Berlin where this cordon was. But actually the cordon wasn't even exactly clear, so he came down in a taxi, down this big road to the barricades. They told him to go away. He walked around the building and then shooting started and he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time and was standing in front of that window that shot. Hi.
I have a vague recollection of hearing somewhere that he sent articles to New Zealand, that they weren't published under his name and just by a New Zealander.
Yeah. Well, no one had bylines then. I don't think there were any bylines. Some people have asked me, would it have been kind of seen as not very good to use his name? Because the reason I found them was because after he died, they published them with his name. And said, this is the last article Mr. Mackay sent to the Dominion, this is the last article Mr. Mackay sent to the New Zealand Herald. He was also sending articles back to Australia. But the Rhinelanders Ball one, it just says by a New Zealander in Berlin. So I wonder if there's more out there. Again, the Manawatu Standard had said, when they reported his death, they said, oh, just a few weeks ago he sent us an article about the ball. So that's how I was able to find that. But yeah, all time and papers passed. Hi.
Hello, I know that his wife's family were a respectable family in Wanganui. Have any letters survived from his wife? I mean, she would have known him quite well, presumably. Has anything survived from that side of the story?
There's quite a lot in the collection at the museum, but it really more relates to other parts of that family story. One of the daughters went to America in the 20s and died of flu, but had children, and she has a descendant that's a judge in California. Because the man that Elizabeth Mackay married was the head of the Harvard Medical School. So people like that are quite easy to follow through the New York Times. No, it's sort of like he's sort of just been purged from the collection. Some of those censored letters talk about wanting to know how they are, and that he says he hasn't even had a letter, that he tried to be a good father. So they're very, very moving. But I think I met Joe Duncan's cousin, Margaret Fennell, and she said to me that her mother, as Mackey's wife's sister, went to see him in prison, and I think that's right. I think I did see her in the file as visiting. So, maybe it wasn't, some of the Duncans did actually visit. Hi.
Hi, what kind of sense did you get of these people as personalities, and would you have liked to have been a friend of Charles Mackay, for example? What sort of has come out of all this research for you as a person?
Yeah, I guess I've always been motivated by the sort of curiosity about what it was like to be a gay man in a different period. My friend Gareth Watkins asked me the other night, what would I say to Charles Mackay? I think Charles Mackay would have been an amazing company. He seems to have an amazing charisma and energy and dynamism, but I think he was a little bit fast and loose. I mean, they called the council chamber a beer pit in that period, because they just. But I mean, you know what? Local government is not for shrinking violence, so you do have to be tough. Of course, when I was talking to Gareth, I thought, of course, the thing to ask him is what the heck happened, because he never said. He wrote on that statement, which was never signed by Cresswell, which is really odd. Hospital bed statements are usually always signed because the person might die. So it's something quite fishy, I think. Why did the cousin never give a statement? Why did these 2 letters never get found about Mackay resigning? But yeah, no, I think he'd have been. It's Cresswell that I can't figure out. I really. And again, that's why I like that querying the past idea, is that sometimes it's just unknowable. Because Cresswell kind of would, in some of his writing, sort of distance himself from being homosexual, but yet was very open about his relationships with men. But I guess maybe that's us coming at it with our own these terms, which haven't even been invented for them yet. So it's a different, and also in an environment where everything's illegal. All relationships between men and males are illegal. It's not like now, where we've got this 16-year-old cut-off. So yeah, it's a different world. But I think he would have been a very interesting person to know.
The cover of the book, his face, the photographs you've shown us, show great character, and it was reduced to a very bland face. Is there a reason behind that?
I contacted Gavin Hurley, who did that work, and because I knew he'd done portraits of other people, and I said, have you ever thought about doing Charles Mackay? And that's his second go at it. He did one that was sort of more monochromatically that one, and he told me he wasn't really doing these portraits anymore. So that just sort of sat there, and I just because it wasn't a commission or anything. I mean, he was just doing it as an exercise. But then Nicola Leggett saw it from Massey University Press and said, that would make a great cover. I think it would have been great if he'd sort of been able to get the profiles a bit more, because we have a picture of Alexander Turnbull that Gavin Hurley did, and my boss, the chief librarian, said, it's just Alexander Turnbull. But well, they all did look a bit the same, basically. Great moustaches.
Is this the end for you? Or are you going to carry on?
Well, it's very filmic.
Yeah.
Don't think. And Wanganoo's got a film agency, and a lot of the locations are still there. And every time I talk to Galen Preston and all these people about their eyes light up. So I wonder if now that the book is finally out, if there might be a film in the other, which would be fun.
Is it a podcast?
Yeah. Well, actually, there was another part of this book that hasn't come through, because one of my ideas originally, and why it took a bit longer, was I kind of had this idea of Mackay's story and then my story of going to Berlin, going to London. Some of the things I've been telling you today, they're not really in the book, although you are kind of there with me. But that got taken out, and I'm pleased it did, because it meant his story could really shine, and Cresswell. But that material's all there, so maybe that could be material for Because it's really interesting, you know, living in that gay part of Berlin, which has come back after it completely disappeared. You know, it's quite sobering to think what was around the corner in 1929. And we know what happened, but you know, they didn't know that they were heading towards this catastrophe. And yeah, all the gay bars closed or went underground, or people went to concentration camps. And then after the war and things, it comes back again. It's not in exactly the same place. I realised it used to be further east, a few blocks, and that's where Mackay was living. So that's why it's a little bit hard to imagine now, because all the buildings were bombed and they've gone. Nollendorfplatz, if you go to Berlin, is the gay area now going west, but it used to actually start a bit further in, and that's where he was living, right in the heart of the old gay area. But like you've probably heard me say in some of the stories, interviews and things, you know, one of the big lessons for me in this is just not being complacent, because things can change. You know, you think they won't, but what if the woman in Texas think about abortion?
No.
You know, that wouldn't necessarily change, and it has changed, and so things can change on a dime. So.
Paul, I saw yesterday a record of a land dealing by Henry Sargent, and one of the three names of the people he was dealing with was Cresswell, and that land was not up the Parapara, but over at Mangamahu. So I wonder, I'm going to follow it up, but I wonder if the Cresswell's found over there rather than...
Yeah, I might have that wrong. Yeah, because is that Charles Marshall Cresswell?
I haven't had a chance to check, I just saw the name Cresswell. So.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting, because Darcy Cresswell's uncle who lived here was the boss of the meat works.
Yeah.
Yeah, at Castlecliff. And he was in, you know, because Castlecliff was a separate kind of entity then, he was involved in the board, the town board and stuff. You know, so would have known Mackay through that.
Yeah.
But I did find a reference to Mackay having done the will for the son that died in Passchendaele, with his name crossed out. So he definitely knew the family.
I think one last question before we wrap up, and then we've got one.
Very basic.
Yeah.
Why did Mackay have a loaded gun in his office?
Apparently, one of the statements in the court case said that he had been having death threats as a result of the row over the royal visit, and people have been bringing him up at his house and making death threats. And it's incredible to think that he might have had the gun when he was greeting the Prince of Wales. And I tried to find, you know, his gun licensing was actually changed in New Zealand after that. That's when the whole registration system came in. And I was curious, like, what sort of gun was it? You know, a revolver, a pistol. He clearly wasn't. I don't know that he'd really done much work on how to use it. Yeah, but in the book you'll see there's what Prue can remember of saying to Josephine Duncan. It was interesting what Joe said. Prue said, "Do you think he was set up?" Oh, of course he was, said Josephine. It happens all the time. And Prue said, "Well, do you think it was the RSA?" She says, "No, that was just a distraction." So again, perhaps this idea that there was something else going on with the town. So maybe we'll never know, or maybe something will pop up for Volume 2. Anyway, thanks very much, everyone.